r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Go Navy 27. My city has been cut off from the world and overrun with monsters. I have a set of rules to stay alive. I finally made it to the bookstore, and it turns out Zoe had one hell of a story to tell. Part 11. Hello again. Here I am, back to tell you about the rest of my bookstore adventure after Waffles saved my life. I'm sure you've all been on the edge of your seats, since that was the first time I stopped a story in the middle. Maybe you got to the end of that one and were like, what the fuck, Eli? Well, sorry, but not really. It was getting long, and I needed to take a break somewhere. Besides, I'm back now, so don't get your panties in a twist. Have you been dying to see what happened? I like to think you have been. Not because I enjoy making you wait or anything. Just because it makes me happy to imagine people being invested in what happens to me. You know, like my family was. It's nice to think that someone out there still cares that I'm alive. Anyway, let's avoid delving deeper into that existential crisis waiting to happen. If you missed part 1 of my bookstore journey, you should really read that first. From this point on, I'm assuming you're caught up. Ready? Great. Full speed ahead. So, after all the Brents almost killed me in front of the bank and Waffles saved me and then handed me the note from Zoe, I went with it, him. Guess I shouldn't refer to him as it now. You'll have to bear with me, it's taking some getting used to. I went with him because Mr. Bailey had talked to him and seemed to trust him. I recognized Zoe's handwriting, too, so he was definitely sent by her. It was also my best option. What was I gonna do, say no and walk away and try again later? Yeah, because my own efforts were going so well. Plus, and this is honestly a driving factor here, I was dying of curiosity. You know how they say curiosity killed the cat? Well, I can personally attest to the fact that it did not kill Mr. Bailey, but it was killing me. I'd already had a ton of questions for Zoe, and now I found out that she'd befriended a Brent. A Brent who seemed pretty chill and wasn't trying to eat me. How the hell had that happened? So, for all those reasons, I went with him. And it's a good thing I did. We encountered a few Calebs on the way, and I didn't even have to bring out my laser. Waffles took them on and fucking obliterated them. It was epic. It made me like him even more. Luckily, that was all we encountered, because it turns out, I'd made it awfully close to the bookstore already. In my mad sprint from the Brent herd, I'd at least sprinted in the right direction. Waffles led me down Sycamore Street, which had blood stains on the pavement and shards of glass sprinkled about but was all in all surprisingly quiet, before stopping in front of what had to be the bookstore. It was 2 stories, made of faded brick. On the first floor was a big bay window, or what had once been a bay window. There was no glass there anymore except a few jagged pieces around the edges. What appeared to be a large dark blanket had been hung up to block the gaping hole. Up on the second floor were 2 smaller windows, which appeared to still be intact but were also blocked by dark blankets, or maybe blackout curtains. It was hard to tell from here. Above the door was a large sign reading Donovan's Books. I was so caught up in my observations of the building that I'd forgotten I was just standing in the middle of the street. Mr. Bailey chirped to get my attention, and when I turned to look at him sitting on my shoulder, he simply jerked his head in the direction of Waffles. Which is when I realized that poor Waffles had been standing to my side for a hot minute, gesturing repeatedly for me to go ahead and walk up to the door. Embarrassed, I nodded and took the necessary few steps forward. I reached out and put my hand on the knob, but then I hesitated. There was still some small part of me that worried this was a trap. I didn't think it was, but I couldn't be totally sure. Still, I'd made it this far, and God, did I want to hear what Zoe had to say. So, with a little meow of encouragement from Mr. Bailey, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Stepping inside, I closed the door behind me, because there was zero chance Waffles could fit through it. Before I could even wonder how he'd get in, the dark blanket hanging behind the window shifted, and he came through the window opening hunched over, straightening back out once he'd made it through. Well, one question answered, anyway. The bookstore was bigger than it had looked from the outside. It wasn't wide, but it extended farther back than I'd expected. Shelves and shelves of books took up most of the room, now that I'd expected. A few steps in front of me was a counter with a cash register and an ancient-looking typewriter on it. And to my and Waffles' left, against that wall, was a set of wooden stairs, leading up to the beginning of a hallway. The lights were on so that I could see all this, but I still didn't see Zoe. Waffles didn't seem bothered, we just stood there in silence. After several minutes, I couldn't take it anymore, and I was about to turn to Waffles and ask him where the hell his friend was when at that moment, almost as if she'd sensed me reaching my time limit, Zoe appeared from between bookshelves, halfway down the row. "Sorry, I was finishing a chapter," she called as she came closer. "To Kill a Mockingbird. Did you ever read it? For school or anything?" I shook my head no, still reeling from the shock of everything that was happening. She set the book down on the counter and tisked. "You should. It was my dad's favorite. I read it every month or so now. Makes me feel closer to him, you know?" "Yeah," I managed to say. After all, here she was. After all this time, right in front of me, talking about classic novels like I wasn't standing there next to her monster friend, with a not totally cat on my shoulder, having almost died 20 minutes ago. This was also the first time I'd seen her up close. Her hair, it was, in fact, brown like I'd thought from my long-distance view in the concert hall, was up in a bun, escaped strands framing her face. She wore glasses and a navy blue hoodie. And she was the best thing I'd ever seen, because she was the first human I'd been this close to in nearly a year. Thinking of that snapped me out of my shock, and all my questions came tumbling back, tripping over each other in my head in their haste to be asked first. I opened my mouth to say, "Listen, you've got a lot of explaining to do," or maybe, "How in the hell are you friends with a Brent?" Or possibly just, "What the fuck?" But before I could say anything, she lunged forward and put a hand over my mouth. This made me notice that she was considerably shorter than me, like, only one up to my shoulder. But somehow, I wasn't any less inclined to shut up. She whispered. "We can't talk about important stuff here. Follow me." She turned and quickly made her way up the stairs. Hesitantly, I went after her, taking the narrow steps two at a time. At the top, I realized the upper floor wasn't part of the store, but rather, a living space above it. We passed an open doorway. Inside I could see an office, and two closed doors on our right before coming to another door on our left, where Zoe stopped. She quickly opened the door and led me inside. Waffles had apparently stayed downstairs. The hallway was too narrow for him, probably, because when she shut it behind us, it was just me, her, and Mr. Bailey in what appeared to be her living quarters. There was a mattress on the floor with unmade sheets, a desk with a computer, a pile of clothes. Whatever this room had once been, and it sure didn't look like a bedroom, it was now her home. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and gestured for me to take her desk chair, which I did. And then after a few seconds of silence, I said, "Okay, now can I ask you things? Because there's a lot of shit I want answered." "Go for it," she said. "Great. Then my first question is, why is this room fine for talking but downstairs wasn't?" I lowered my voice. "Do you know about the cameras and listening devices too?" She laughed. "Of course I do. That's why this room is safe. It's soundproof." What?" She smiled and tucked a wayward strand of hair behind her ear. "Yep. My dad owned this store. Up here was his office, I think you saw it, and some other stuff. Mostly storage. But this room was for my sister. We'd come straight here after school, especially when we were little, because my mom worked late, and they didn't want us home alone. So, we'd come here, and I'd read downstairs or do my homework in Dad's office. But my sister played violin, and she always wanted to practice after school. Kids aren't exactly quiet or, well, good when they practice instruments though, and he didn't want her disturbing the store. So, he cleared out this room and soundproofed it, and she used it as a practice room for years. Until she, well, you know." "Wow," I said. "So, you mean, they can't hear us here at all?" "Nope," she said proudly. "Once I realized they were watching and listening, I moved in here. Where they can't hear me at all." She looked up to the ceiling and yelled, "Hey, fuck you." We waited in silence for several seconds, and nothing happened. She shrugged. "See? Even in the hallway, you wouldn't have heard that." A few things were slowly clicking into place. "That's why you didn't want to come to me. Why you wanted me to come here. So that we could talk with no one listening." "Ding ding ding, we have a winner," she exclaimed. "But in all seriousness, yeah. I'm sorry I didn't explain earlier, but I wanted to be careful. Just in case. I thought the concert hall would be a good middle ground at first, since it'd be hard to hear with the echoes, but you know how that turned out." I rubbed my recovered arm, flinching slightly as my fingers brushed where it had been bruised and broken. "Oh, trust me, I remember." She gave me a little smile. "I really am sorry about that. I didn't plan that ambush. After that, I figured I should stop trying to find other places and should just invite you here. I'm glad you're okay." "Well, so am I," I said. "What about the riddle, though?" She looked a little embarrassed. "It sounds stupid, but I wanted to make sure you were human. I knew you were looking for me. But I hadn't seen you up close. For all I knew, you were another, more refined monster. I thought a riddle would be too much work for a monster to solve. They don't care that much about finding someone. Plus, I figured if anyone was watching, it was better than giving you a location right away. I scoffed. Well, I think that backfired a little, because I definitely talked about it more to myself, trying to solve it. And now I know they heard all that. We were both silent for a long moment. I think we were processing everything that had just been said. At least, I was. It was in this silence that Mr. Bailey decided to get to know her better. He jumped off my shoulder, made his way to the mattress, and sniffed her. Zoe held out her hand, let him investigate that too. I held my breath, because even if everything she said was true, I wasn't sure I would trust her if Mr. Bailey didn't approve. After all, I trust Mr. Bailey's judgment more than I trust pretty much anything else. I didn't have to worry. A second later, his sniffing turned into rubbing his face on her hand, and he burst into a loud purr. He even climbed into her lap and settled down there, staring back at me with his intelligent eyes and continuing to purr. I swear he was thinking something along the lines of, "I dare you not to like her. See what happens. You'd be an idiot, that's what. She's a good person. Maybe I even like her more than I like you." Okay, maybe not that last part, but he was definitely telling me that he approved of her and that he thought I should too. Which, honestly, put me more at ease. I still had a lot more questions, obviously, but it was certainly a big step towards trusting her. She was grinning from ear to ear at this point, stroking Mr. Bailey gently, her eyes sparkling behind her glasses as she looked up at me. "He likes me," she stage whispered. "He's adorable." Mr. Bailey made a content little chirping noise, and I rolled my eyes. "Attention whore. Don't compliment him too much. He has an ego, and he knows what you're saying." Her eyes widened. "What?" So, I told her about Mr. Bailey. Not everything, not all the little details, but I told her about his past, and about the first night I spent with him, and about his capacity to understand us, sense monsters, and even communicate. I didn't specify the typing, I just said he communicates with his noises, and that he made me realize about the cameras and audio devices. I wanted to protect Mr. Bailey, just in case he was wrong about her. He would like me to clarify here that he is never wrong, and that I was overly concerned. I would like to clarify that though he has not been wrong yet, I was simply being a good friend and survival partner. When I finished, she just said, "Wow," and scratched him behind his ears, causing another loud explosion of purrs. So, I took the opportunity to throw in some more questions. After all, I'd just shared quite a bit of personal info, and it seemed only fair that it was her turn. "What about you? How did you meet Waffles? How do you find out we're being observed?" Before I continue, let me include this disclaimer. I'm only sharing her story with her consent. I told her about my posts, and she was all for it, and she gave me permission to include what she told me. Just getting it out there so some jackass doesn't give me crap about sharing someone else's private details. Screw you and the horse you rode in on, because I have permission, sucker. Anyway. She sighed and said, "Well, my parents died that first day. I was with my sister for a few days, but she didn't make it much longer. I saw her ripped apart within the week. It was brutal. I still have nightmares about it, occasionally." She closed her eyes briefly and took a deep breath before continuing. "After that, I was alone for a long time. Months. I was living here, but not in this room specifically. Mostly downstairs, sleeping in the armchairs there. I got attacked in here a few times. The window had been broken since that first day, when my dad died in the store. So, it made it easy for monsters to get in. I didn't get the bright idea to put up the blankets until the third or so time I got attacked at home. They work, you know. Hide the lights, hide the movements. I'm glad I thought of it, because the other option was to leave, and I didn't want to leave." Her voice cracked a little on her next words. "It's the only piece I have left of my dad." I didn't blame her for feeling that way about her dad. In fact, I admired her for wanting to stay close to his memory. I've never been able to go back to my old house. Not once since that first night. For me, the memories hurt too much. Sometimes I wish I could, just to remember the good things, but if I went back, I think I'd only remember the bad. The blood on the walls would make sure of that. She cleared her throat. A little while later, I guess it was about 3 months after this all started, I was out on my way to a grocery store when I heard screams. Only they weren't human screams, I could tell that much. They were just as desperate and pained, though. And I knew I shouldn't, But my heart just hurt for whoever or whatever was screaming like that. And I felt drawn in a way I can't explain. So, I went towards the noise. I had my axe, of course, I'm not an idiot. I got close and peeked around the corner to see what was happening. And it was Waffles, getting the shit beat out of him by a bunch of Seth stash. At this point I interrupted her. Sorry, but what the hell is a Seth? She looked at me like I was crazy. A skinless eyeless freak? Seth? I know you've fought them. You know, the monsters who look like their skin was ripped off, with the long arms and the empty eye sockets? That you can use lasers on? Oh, you mean a Caleb, I said. She looked at me like I was crazier. What? So, we took a brief intermission for me to explain my monster naming system. I hadn't actually called them Calebs when describing Mr. Bailey's backstory. I'd been purposefully vague and simply said a monster dash so we had some clearing up to do. After some confusion and lot of really bad descriptions, we were able to figure out what we each called all of the monsters. Turns out she doesn't call them after people she hated in high school. Weird. She did agree that me calling a monster Caleb after Caleb was justified, though, after I told her about him. Fuck Caleb. Once we were done blowing each other's minds, she resumed her story. Their Waffles was getting destroyed by those, she looked at me pointedly, Caleb's, and it was awful. He was screaming and whining, and they were tearing him apart. I don't know what started it. But somehow, I just knew he was different, and that I should help him. So, I did. I had a few laser pointers in my pocket, and some tape, and I took out all of the lasers and taped down the buttons, so that they were constantly on without me having to press them. I whistled, impressed. Why hadn't I thought of that before? I held them all between the fingers of my left hand and my axe with my right. I knew it wasn't the best idea, but I was running out of time to save him. I raced over there and screamed to get their attention. It worked, and as they all turned to look at me, I started waving my hand around, hoping to get the lasers in their eyes by sheer luck. Unfortunately, that's not the most reliable way to aim lasers, so I couldn't hit their eyes long enough to have much effect. Then they were coming for me, and my axe wouldn't be enough to get them all. I frantically looked around, and thank God I was near a tech store. I sprinted in with the, Caleb's in hot pursuit. I was hoping for more laser pointers or even just somewhere to hide. I got even luckier. On the floor near some broken shelves at the back, was this display of what looked like flashlights. Only the sign said they were actually heavy-duty lasers. I swear, I almost laughed out loud in gratitude. I grabbed several and turned them on, and oh boy, were they glorious. I set them on each level of the unbroken shelves, and as the first Calebs came around the corner, they were hit right in the face by the massive lasers at eye level. They started screeching and stumbling, and as they fell to their knees, the next lowest lasers started hitting them. The smoke started, and as they scratched at their burning eyes, I axed them to death. The next pair after those two had seen what happened, though, and they swiped the massive lasers off the shelves as soon as they reached them, avoiding the worst of the damage. They were too close for me to grab more lasers and turn them on. I had to back up to keep from getting shredded. Then one of them knocked over that display, and the rest of the lasers went flying. No chance to get more. But the TVs were right behind me, and one or two were unbroken. So, I took a chance and went back to my little lasers, and I shined them off the surfaces of the TV screens, and the beams bounced off those screens and off shards of glass scattered all over, and it created a mini laser maze of sorts in that corner. Not strong beams, but enough that as they came forward, some of the crisscrossing reflected beams got in their eyes. That was all I needed. Once they started stumbling, I threw the lasers away and just pushed the television off the shelf and onto them. It shattered and pinned them, just long enough for me to axe them too. Honestly, I mostly survived that day because of luck. I like to think I was graced with good luck because I was trying to do the right thing and save Waffles. But it was probably just regular old-fashioned luck. I went back outside to Waffles, who was lying in the street, wounded. He was in bad shape. The most distinctive thing was that half his chest had been torn apart, blood was everywhere, his skin and fur were ripped off, I could literally see his ribcage. I could also see, buried right there in his chest cavity, a little camera. I gently took it out, because I figured no one wants a camera in his body. And I axed it too. I couldn't carry him, so I slowly dragged him into the tech store. It took me an hour. And I lived there for the next week while he healed. Luckily, his kind heal fast, I guess. I didn't know what he ate besides humans and I didn't want him to eat me, so I tried a lot of things from my shopping trips. The only thing he liked was waffles. You know, those frozen waffles? He ate, like, 2 boxes a day. I jokingly called him Waffles, and he seemed to enjoy having a name. I don't think he'd ever had one before. After that it just stuck. I don't know why he is the way he is, she added after a moment's thought. Maybe there was an abnormality when he was created in whatever godforsaken lab made him. Who knows? He can't talk to tell me. But he understands me pretty well. I talked to him a lot while I hung out with him in the tech store. He seemed to like that too. When I asked if all monsters had cameras, he nodded yes. And his answers helped me figure out about the audio too. Once he was better, I asked if he wanted to stay with me, and he made the cutest whining noise. I could tell he was happy. I moved into this room right when we got back because of what he told me. He sleeps downstairs, in a nest I made for him. He's great protection, and a great friend. She looked down at Mr. Bailey, still in her lap. I'm sure you understand. I do, I said softly, still thinking about Waffles. She'd known about being observed much longer than I had, then. No wonder she seemed to know what she was doing. One last question for now, I said. It had been a long time, after all, and we both had a lot to think about. Did you draw the red X marks by the dome? Yes, she said. Why? She tucked another strand of hair behind her ear. Or maybe it was the same one as before, escaping again. I'm looking for weaknesses, obviously. I know there's a weakness. A place where monsters can be sent in. A door, kind of. Like in the Truman Show, you know? Waffles told me. He just can't remember where it is. But I'm going to find it. I'll search every inch of that motherfucking dome if I have to. She paused. You can help, if you want. It sure would be nice for both of us to get out of here. On one condition. My heart stopped. Even Mr. Bailey looked up in alarm. What could she mean? But Zoe smiled. I told you my name, but I still don't know yours. You're just the cute, mysterious guy I see kicking monster ass and sometimes being an idiot. Yes, that's a direct quote. She called me cute, y'all. This is not a drill. I won't lie, I was thrilled. My heart grew 3 sizes that day. Ha. Any Grinch fans out there? I stuck out my hand to shake, and she took it. I'm Eli, I said. Nice to meet you. Eli, she repeated, smiling. Nice to meet you too.